down to Roman army, all the way down where we had left off. The Roman army. Who would like to read for me? I want names. I want names. Don't make me choose you. Okay, let's start with Dina. Go ahead.
The Roman army. Organization of Roman legions. Roman legion, from Latin legio, military levy, normally indicates the basic ancient Roman army units recruited specifically from Roman citizens. Initially used fighting methods of Greeks, phalanx, but due to hilly terrain, the Roman developed own methods in legions, which were commanded by a legate.
A legate.
A legate.
How the Roman army was organized, Dina?
The legion was made up of around 6,000 men who were divided into 10 cohorts. Each cohort was made up of 6 centuries of 80 men. The centuries were commanded by a centurion.
A centurion, yep. So the way the legion was broken down, again, very complicated, right? Total of 6,000 men, okay, 10 cohorts, okay, which was made up of 6 centuries, each having 80 men, okay? So it was a breakdown, okay? Yeah. Well, we're gonna look at that, okay? When we get to the empire, that's at its height, right? But right now we're in the republic, so it's growing at this point. Okay. Okay, so just again try it is a little bit complicated, but try to remember some of these numbers. Okay. I'm gonna quiz you in about 10 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna quiz you. So try to memorize what we're going through now, or write it down. Just quick points, okay? Okay. Key roles.
The centurions were very important men. They were responsible for training the soldiers under their command and making sure everyone obeyed orders. Failure to perform duties or cowardice were corrected by stoning or even execution of one of every 10 men.
Wow, that's harsh, right? Wow.
Mister, what do they mean by stoning 1 out of 10 men? Like if 10 people didn't obey, they would
They would
stone
pick
one
out,
of
yep,
them?
they would pick out one in every 10. Okay. If a whole group, let's say, disobeyed or not following orders, okay, to make a statement, you would normally, not in every case, but this was common, choosing 1 out of 10 to make an example of. Standard bearers, Dina.
Legion Legion standard silver eagle was considered sacred and was always kept near the commanding general. Each century had its own emblem or standard. This was carried by the standard bearer, a very experienced and trusted soldier. To lose your standard was a great disgrace.
So you'll see often if you watch Gladiator or any of these Roman movies, at the very front of the legion, you'll see a banner with a silver eagle, right? And again, a very sacred for the military, for war. So the silver eagle is something you'll see often throughout the Roman army. Who would wants to read now? How about KD? How do you become a legionnaire, buddy?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so how to become a legionnaire? You had to be a Roman citizen. You had to be physically fit and 1.6 meters tall. You were expected to stay in the army for 25 years. So, sir, were there like no really short legionnaires?
As the army got more advanced, you had to be over this height. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. But don't worry, if you weren't this tall, they would still use you in other means. Okay, so again, they would figure out ways to use you. Maybe not necessarily fighting or in the army, but it would be something for you. They would put you to work.
Sir, so like if you're in the army for 25 years, does that mean just like 25 years straight, or do you get like time off or go home, or like were your
It's,
family close to you?
it depended on the situation. It depended on the time, right? Sometimes it was necessary to go back, whether it be to farm the land or others. If you were part of the government, because a lot of the soldiers, especially the high-ranking soldiers, were also made very important decisions with government. So again, it depended who you were. It depended your status. So yes, it's hard to answer that because it all depends on your status in the Legion. Okay. Training.
Training.
Yeah.
Training. Most soldiers joined between 18 and 20 years old. There were 30-kilometer marches each month. On each march, the legionnaire would carry 25 kilos of equipment. Motto: strength and honor. The 3 Ds: drill, discipline, and decimation.
The 3 Ds: drill, discipline, decimation. Strength and honor is the motto. Would you guys be able to do a 30K march? What do you think? Are you guys strong enough?
With the
Guys
kilos,
and girls?
I
And
don't know
girls?
about that.
Yeah.
Training. Legionnaires would also learn drill or marching. This was important for learning maneuvers in battle. New recruits were given shields and swords twice as heavy as the real thing. Policy of divide and conquer. To move armies around so quickly, Romans built roads and bridges and built war machines, catapult, which could hurl a 27 PG boulder, 500 meters, and battering ram, which took 1,000 1,000 men to mobilize for action.
We'll see some of this stuff, especially even at the beginning. If you watch, if you've seen Gladiator, yeah, Gladiator is a terrific movie. We're gonna watch that maybe next week.
Sir, so
Yeah.
it took 1,000 men to use a battering ram.
To mobilize it, to
So
build
that's
it.
to build it up and
Yes.
then okay.
This is complicated stuff, right? Especially think of the time. Okay. Yes. Oh yeah, dedicated engineers. Yeah, remember a lot of this stuff was taken and used from the Greeks, right? The Greeks were the first ones to engineer this. So there was already a playbook or a write-up on how to make these, but the Romans were able to utilize this in war like nobody else. Okay. Yes, and this is an interesting policy which we'll learn about later. Divide and conquer. That was the Roman policy. So who else could join the army? Who else was in the army? KD? Auxiliaries.
The auxiliaries, there were soldiers from lands conquered by the Romans who volunteered to fight for the Romans. Many of these had special skills like cavalry soldiers. There were archers. Most fought with a sword and a short spear. thought of by Romans as second-class soldiers, paid less and not trained as rigorously. After 25 years, they became citizens, and their children were too.
Good. So once the Romans would conquer a territory or a province, that province would then become one of Rome. Okay. And what they would do is they would take soldiers in those provinces and use them as what we call auxiliaries. Okay. There's also a term called mercenaries, which are paid fighters. Okay. But auxiliaries, again, these were soldiers from conquered land, and they would use them in different ways. Sometimes these different people were archers, or they were really good with horses. So they would use them in different ways. And again, after 25 years, it was all about Roman citizenship. Everybody wanted citizenship, so they would get that after 25 years. Auxiliaries. Are you ready for your quiz? Are you ready for a quiz? I'm going to give you guys maybe 5 minutes to complete this matching. Okay, this matching quiz right here. Match these statements with the terms. Go ahead. Terms on the left, definition on the right. Match them up. Good. Okay, I'll give you a couple more minutes. Make sure you at least try matching these 7 terms. Okay, let's take a look at the answers. Sarah, can you go through the answers for me? Just read it off my screen and see how you did, okay?
Okay. Legion made up of 10 cohorts. Legate commanded a legion. Cohort made up of 6 centuries. Century about 80 men. Centurion commanded a century. Auxiliaries, non-Roman volunteers. Legionary, soldier in Roman legion.
How did you do?
I got them all.
Oh, good. Okay, so just make sure you guys know these are the important terms that we learned today, okay? And Sarah, continue reading, please. So as we get to the end of the Republic, like that we learned last week, there were some changes. There were changes to the legions as we enter the first century BC. So we're getting closer to Julius Caesar now, and the reformers that we learned with the fall of the Republic. So what happened with the changes to the legion, Sarah?
Changes to legion. At the end of the 2nd century BCE, 107 BC, Gaius Marius reformed the legion as a professional force, drawing from the poorest classes, enabling Rome to field larger armies and providing employment for jobless citizens of the city of Rome. Immediately after the Marian reforms, a Roman legion comprised 10 cohorts known simply as the first cohort, the second cohort, etc. The first cohort was considered to be the most senior and prestigious, and 10th the least. However, this new system started to foster a loyalty of soldiers in the hands of their general rather than the state of Rome itself. This development ultimately enabled Julius Caesar to cross the Rubicon with an army loyal to him personally and effectively end the Republic.
Good. So essentially, and we're not quite there yet, but the end of the Republic pretty much comes when Julius Caesar crosses the Rubicon. And the reason he could do that is because the Roman army gives their loyalty to him. They get the Roman army changes loyalty from the state to one man, and that would be Julius Caesar. The rise of what they call the rise of the generals, where the Roman army no longer supports the state, the Roman state, they support the general. And that could only have happened with the reforms, okay, many decades before by Gaius Marius. He is the one that reforms the army. Okay, he brings in the poor classes. Okay, and we're going to learn about him. Well, you actually, that was part of your homework, was Gaius Marius. Okay, and his reforms. Okay, so that's just how the legion kind of changes its loyalty to the state of Rome, and then to the generals like Pompey, like Caesar, later Octavian, okay, the first emperor. So, okay. If we take a look at a kind of an overview of the Roman legion, looks something like this. I mean, this is quite the system. So you could see how Rome was so successful using this type of legion organization system, which they pretty much copied from the Greeks, but then really made some major advancements with technology and organization. Okay. Take a look at the Roman legion. KD, are you with us?
Yes, sir.
If the Roman commander asked you which part of the Roman army would you like to be a part of? Would you be a part of the cavalry? Would you want to be in the cohort as a soldier? Would you want to be an archer? Would you want to be a reserve? What would you want to be?
So maybe the reserves are they're looking pretty good right now. I won't lie. They're just as important.
Yeah. Interesting.
Sir, where are the archers?
Well, the archers were usually in the back, right? Like they're not in this picture, but because archers, they can go such a long way, they were usually at the back of the military.
Yeah. That
And
would
they
be
were
the
very
best.
useful. I mean, if you had good archers, that was very, very useful. Okay, because you could cause a lot of damage with arrows. Okay.
I
Wait,
think
sir.
this position, because they're at the back.
Yeah.
They just like long distance, and they're like the most important. They're lethal. So.
Yeah.
Sir,
Very-
what would the archers do when they start becoming when the cohorts and everyone just starts becoming toe to toe with the enemy?
Well, then it would be somewhat useless, right? Because again, you might be hitting your own guy. So yeah, it would usually occur at the beginning of battle once you have good position of the enemy. But once it's an all-out, combat, hand-to-hand combat, yeah, it is pretty much useless because you're hitting random people and it could be your own, right? So
Mhm.
Were the cavalry usually auxiliary, or did they have their own?
So they had their own. Yeah, that's a good question. Certain provinces, certain people were much more skilled in the cavalry use. The Romans would become good cavalry, but a lot of them were from other groups. Yep. Yeah. At least at the beginning of the Republic. Okay, so great job, guys. So great job. So that's the first half. That's the Roman army. Now let's take a look at the Punic Wars. Okay, the Punic Wars. Now, before I do that, I'm going to kind of lay out the intro to the war. And I'm going to do it. There's this great 4 episodes on YouTube. It's really, really well done. It's here, Total War History. We're going to watch the first one, maybe 20 minutes. And it's basically an intro, how it starts. Intro to the Punic Wars. And it's going to introduce us to the Carthaginians. Okay. So let's learn about how it starts, these two trading powers. Okay.
Powers of Rome and Carthage, going through each and every step of this 23-year-long conflict between two ancient superpowers. The war would have been fought between 264 and 241 BC between the mighty powers of Rome and Carthage. And in this first episode, we're going to be diving into the eve of the war, setting up the battle and the war, and trying to investigate where each faction and each power stood before outright conflict started, and to see what led to the spark that ignited this bloody, bloody war. So let's go ahead and take a look first at Carthage. Carthage was originally a Phoenician colony that was established in 814 BC on the northern coast of Africa. The Phoenicians were located initially in modern-day Lebanon, and they had very, very good, even prolific seafaring capabilities. They established colonies all along the Mediterranean. Carthage was one of them. As I said, founded in 814 BC, well before the foundation of Rome, which was, according to Rome's mythology, supposed to have been founded in 753 BC. So that's about 100 years after the founding of the Phoenician colony in northern Africa that would grow and become Carthage. Now, Carthage would become one of the more famous, of course, of these Phoenician colonies. And Phoenician, the origins is why we call the Carthaginians the Punic powers. And Carthage as well developed into a large agricultural power. The coast of North Africa would have been much more plentiful and would have had a much more reliable climate when it came to agriculture. And so they were able to develop a huge agricultural base and actually had surpluses. And those surpluses they were able to ship abroad. And in combination with their agriculture, the Carthaginians kept up with the tradition of Phoenician naval supremacy, and they established a huge trade empire. They were famous for their eventual construction of a the circular naval harbor in Carthage itself, and the trade network of Carthage was incredible. The Empire of Carthage initially was just the nearby area around the original settlement, but as the colony grew and grew, it essentially took over the land around it, and instead of paying subsidies and paying fees and fines and tributes to the African kingdoms, Carthage was eventually able to subdue these and was able to in turn get tributes from them. Carthage then expanded, took over the northern coast of Africa, and when we find ourselves at the beginning of this war, Carthage has significant holdings along North Africa, Spain, Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. If we look at Rome, on the other hand, as I said, Rome was, according to mythology, founded in 753 BC, and it had a reign of kings. The last of the kings was ousted, and in place rose a republic, and Rome then went on to fight with its neighbors, the Latin League, the Etruscans to the north, and the Samnites to the south, and would eventually kick out the invading Greeks, who were led by Paris of Epirus, and in doing so, by the time of the Punic Wars, the Romans controlled all of Italy from the Po Valley all the way to the south, and they had not yet expanded past the Italian peninsula. Now let's go into the analysis of where both of these factions stand in terms of their army. So Carthage was a colony, and as it expanded, it essentially kept its citizen body centralized. That is, in terms of each of its expansions, whenever it would conquer a new people, it would have a treaty with them, and instead of bringing them into the Carthaginian body, essentially, and making them citizens, Carthage instead made them give troops in times of war and pay an annual tribute. And so in this way, the Carthaginian core, and that is the citizen army, was very, very small. Carthage, in this case, had to rely on troops sent by its allies, and also the recruitment of mercenaries, which is why Carthage is more notable for its fleet. That's where it amassed most of its forces. And when it came to the land armies, it would mostly draw these from the allies, as I've said, mercenaries, and at times of extreme danger, they would have deployed their core citizenry, who would have formed up in mass ranks with the spears, solid sort of Hellenistic formation, we could say, in the spikes, but they were not notorious for their skill. The Carthaginians were more of a sea and naval power. Now, when they did field their troops, they would have all sorts of different contingents. And notably, they were known for their use of the Numidian cavalry, which proved very, very effective and would have been very skilled at skirmishing, attacking, retreating, baiting enemies, and their true masterful use would most predominantly be shown in the Second Punic War. Carthage also was able to field African forest elephants and strong troops from Gaul, those raised in the Iberian Peninsula, and so it had a huge sort of motley crew that was able to meld together, and it had a big variety they could draw from, lots of strengths. But the weakness came that it was uniting disparate people from different cultures, different languages, and inherently the only central structure that held it all together was the Carthaginian leadership. So that was the general and his staff. So that was the central thing that held the beating heart of each army, was the Carthaginian general. Now the general for Carthage was someone who was appointed by the leadership at Carthage, and he would serve until Carthage decided to change him. So he did not have term limits, and because of this, the longer he was able to stay with his army, the more proficient it could become. And as it stayed longer and longer in the field, the troops could form a much closer bond, knew how to interact with each other, and would really identify with that leader. And over time, as we saw with Hannibal, they could become a very, very strong group of men. Now, the Carthaginians, however, as I said, had a limited number of citizen bodies, as well as the fact that they had to recruit relatively expensive mercenaries. This meant that when they were fighting their battles, they had to pick and choose when they fought because an army was a very valuable thing. If it were to be lost, they would have to retrain it completely. And as I said, initially when you have this disparate factions coming together and uniting in this mercenary army, they have no experience. They're very hard to use. And so once you get a certain level of efficiency with your army, it's something that's very precious that generals who were serving for numerous years were not likely to want to risk. And so these generals would often be very cautious. On top of that, you have to note that these generals, if they were to fail, Carthaginians, the leadership, would be not afraid to punish them. There are often stories of Carthaginian officers or leaders being crucified by their own side in light of failures. Now we turn ourselves to Rome. So this is pre-Marian Rome. At this time, the legion actually comes from the Latin for levy. The legions were essentially citizens who were raised up, and with each consular army, you would have 2 legions and 2 legions of allies who would form the flanks. And so the Roman legions were basically drawn up from the Roman citizenry predominantly, and in opposition to Carthage, whenever Rome took over a new area, it would try and bring them into the central body of Rome. So Rome had a long history of conquering a people and turning them into allies. It would make independent treaties with them, and it would not always, but often extend sort of an enfranchisement. It would make them citizens. And so with every new conquest, Rome would be able to grow its reserves of manpower, and this made it extremely resilient. This made it that the Roman legions could form up, and even if they were defeated, they could rise up again. Now, the legions themselves would have been formed in 5 different components. The first component would have been the velites, the skirmishers up front. These would have been the younger troops. Then after that, we have the hastati, the principae, and the triarii. Now, the hastati were the younger men. These would have been in their early 20s, less experienced, but very eager. The next rank was the principes, late 20s, getting into their prime. They would have been similarly armed with the hastati, and then you have the triarii in the back, the most elder of the shock Roman troops, and they would have been armed with spears, and they would have been the crack troops. There was an expression that if something was hard going, the expression was it came down to the triarii, because they were always the last line. Now, the fifth part would have been the Roman cavalry, the equites. These guys would have been drawn from the Roman nobility who could have afforded horses. Now, it's important to note that as well as having these strong, disciplined troops, initially Roman forces were not very capable. Just like with the Carthaginian forces, they needed training time. And so, it took a while for the Roman general to meld them into a fighting force. But what Rome had over Carthage is that every time it fielded its legions, they had a set way to organize them. They had different levels of command. They had the consuls, the legates, the tribunes. They had all of these different ranks going all the way down to the centurions. So even though the troops were fresh, the manner in which they would go about organizing and leading them would always stay the same, and that made it that much easier to regulate the training of their troops. Now let's move on to the general. The Roman general is a very important figure in his army. The general, it's important to note that a Roman general is also a Roman politician. They cannot be taken apart, essentially. Both are the same. In order to go up the ranks of a political life, you must also go up the ranks in the army. Both were entwined. You could not be an effective politician without being an effective general. There were some cases of people such as, those like, Cato, who might have made a name for themselves, or you could have had Cicero, an orator, people who were skilled and known for other things, but even those men served in the armies. And it's notable that the greatest generals, the greatest politicians, were both the same people. So let's go into this. The Roman general would have been appointed by the Senate, would have proposed it, and the people would have ratified it. The people leading Rome's armies would have been the consuls. There were 2 each year, and it's important to note that their term lasted 1 year. That meant that if you were going to get enough glory, you had to achieve as much as possible within that 1 year. That made it so that whenever an army of Rome took the field, there was tremendous pressure on the commanding officer to seek out glory. And so whereas the Carthaginians were more careful with the deploying and the sort of the movement of their troops, the Romans were very eager to engage in battle, seek glory, especially with the reserves of manpower. And so that's the main 2 differences. And where we end is that Carthage predominantly is going to be a sea power, Rome is going to be a land power, and that's where we're going to be moving into this war. Now, what were the relationships between these two nations before the war? We know that both nations had trade relations. They each acknowledged each other's spheres of influence. Rome, of course, had its own traders who would have come in contact with the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians were all around the Mediterranean, and so both of these had contact. There are references to 3 treaties between Rome and Carthage. These would have outlined where each faction could and could not trade, if there was exclusive trading rights, or if they could both engage in trade in certain areas. There were, inside of these treaties, assertions of essentially Rome would be left to its own matters in Latium, and Carthage would be left to its own in North Africa. And so they both kind of recognized their spheres of influences. The last part of the treaties would have come with the Greeks. Pyrrhus, he had come in and he was answering the call of the Greeks in southern Italy and Syracuse. And so he kind of stirred up the bee's nest, and he was fighting against both the Romans and the powers in Sicily. And so that kind of brought Rome and Carthage together. And they had some treaties together, although the extent of their alliance was not very prolific. There are stories of a Carthaginian fleet being within the vicinity of the battle when the Romans besieged Tarentum in southern Italy. But besides that, there was not, I should say, an extensive mutual alliance taking place, but both of them were in direct contact. Now let's talk a bit about Carthage and its relationship to Greece. So as I said, Carthage was a Phoenician colony, and the Phoenicians had colonies all around the Mediterranean. Carthage grew to be very large, and it established its own colonies. At the same time, however, the Greeks were sailing merchant vessels, and they were establishing colonies. And this proved to be somewhat a tenuous situation, with both of these colonies in different areas coming into conflict. And so you saw these both of these maritime powers fighting for control. And especially some of the main rub of it came down in Sicily, where Carthage had its power mostly to the west, Greeks had most of its power to the east in Syracuse. And so you had a lot of confrontations there, heavy involvement in Sicily, and they had basically a relatively many battles for dominance along that island, because it was key for landing ships, refueling them, and controlling trade in the Mediterranean. So as we move forward, the Greeks actually won a great victory in 480 at Himera, which coincided with their defeat of Xerxes at Salamis and Plataea. So while the Greeks were able to push back Xerxes, they also had this big battle where they defeated the Carthaginians in Sicily. So this kind of puts it in a time frame where you know they're fighting the Persians, and as well the Greeks are fighting Carthage. And so all the while Carthage has this not so great relationship with the Greeks, conflicts are always boiling over in Sicily. And most importantly is going to be Syracuse. Syracuse is going to be a thorn in Carthage's side. Especially when it comes to Agathocles, the tyrant of Syracuse. He actually landed a force in North Africa in 310 BC, leading armies there, and he was able to defeat the Carthaginians there, and he went through, devastated the Carthaginian lands, and although he was not able to lay direct siege to Carthage itself because of the city's size, he was able to scare the Carthaginians and leave his mark, showing that Carthage was not going to get away with interfering with Greek affairs, and that Syracuse would always be there to fight Carthage. Now, next we have Pyrrhus, who comes and intervenes in Sicily and Italy, comes to the aids of the Greek. The Greeks were feeling pressure from the Carthaginians and the Romans. They call for Pyrrhus to come. Pyrrhus arrives with a large horde of Greeks, and as I said, they will go on to fight Rome and Carthage together. And it's possible, as I said, that the Carthaginians had a fleet that aided the Romans during their siege of Tarentum in 272 BC. In any case, Pyrrhus was defeated, and this sort of had a domino effect. It brought Rome into its power formally over control of all of Italy, especially southern Italy. And with that, Pyrrhus was ousted from Sicily, giving Carthage an edge in Sicily. So all of a sudden you have Carthage regaining power in Sicily, you have Rome in southern Italy. So these great powers are now elbow to elbow, and it's only a matter of time before both of their expansionist policies and their own interests come into conflict. Now we're going to start moving into the actual eve of war. While the deeper causes of such conflict are difficult to trace, the incidents which provide the spark for wars are usually more obvious. So we're going to start off in Sicily. The start of this First Punic War is going to have its origins in Sicily, particularly at Messana. So that's going to be a city at the northeast of Sicily, looking across the straits at Italy. And it's in this city that we are going to have to analyze what happened. So let's go ahead and talk about the tyrant Agathocles, who had invaded Carthage in northern Africa. So what he did is he relied on mercenaries during his rule. However,
Okay, I'm going to stop it there as we enter the First Punic War. So I really like that video because it really does give you a solid overview of the Mediterranean around that time in the 3rd century. Okay, so remember, there are 3 wars, right? There are 3 major battles or wars, okay, for the Punic Wars. Okay, and the first one, okay, the first one that we're going to be looking at is 264 BC. So that's really when it starts, 264 BC. Okay, so if you follow my screen, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview before I assign the reading. So let's take a look back at our PowerPoint. Remember the complete history. We love this PowerPoint here. It's fantastic. We looked at the Roman army. So before we get to the Punic Wars, let's just go through Rome conquers Greece. So after Alexander the Great dies in 323 BC, there is a fight over his empire. Remember, it's divided into 3, right? 3 dynasties. And while visiting Corinth, some important Roman delegates were insulted. Remember Corinth, the city-state in Greece? Rome attacks and destroys Corinth, stealing its treasures and riches. And this will mark the beginning of decadence and a love of luxury for the Romans in ancient Greece. And this brings us to the First Punic War, Rome versus Carthage. So basically the first one, okay, was fought over Sicily, as we just saw, okay, 264 to 241. Rome versus Sicily, Syracuse, and Carthage. In short, Rome wins and adds Sicily and Syracuse to its empire and destroys Carthage in Sicily. Okay? So when we think of the First Punic War, we think of Sicily. The Greeks leave Sicily in the 3rd century, and it was, like you saw, it was inevitable that these 2 major powers would be that close. Italy, or the Romans, were looking to expand into Sicily. So this would mark the First Punic War, the Sicilian War. If you take a look at where Carthage is, you see they actually make their way into lots of Europe here, Spain and Portugal, okay, all of North Africa here. Tina, the Second Punic War, please. Now comes Hannibal, 218.
The Second Punic War. So 218 BCE to 202 BCE. Hannibal takes ambitious journey from Spain with 36,000 troops and 37 elephants over the Alps. He conquers most of the Italian peninsula with the remaining 26,000 troops and 1 elephant. So there were 4 great battles with heavy Roman losses, i.e. at Cannae, over 50,000 out of the 86,000 Roman soldiers were annihilated in one day. 14 years later, the final battle at Zama, 202 BCE, Roman general Scipio pushes Hannibal out of Italy, and the Carthaginians were forced to pay reparations to Rome, dismantled the navy, and forfeit commercial empire.
Good. So we take it this roughly 16-year war, and this is where we see Hannibal, who crosses the Alps and enters Italy and just causes damage. I mean, you want to talk about somebody going up and down the peninsula, wiping people, absolutely dismantling the Roman army. I mean, this was quite the feat for Hannibal. Parents would tell their kids very scare their children, right? And what they would use was the term Hannibal, right? So he was quite the figure, quite the leader for the Carthaginians. And you're going to read more about Hannibal. This was the Second Punic War. Again, eventually Rome would win this battle in what was called Zama. Okay, if we take a look at the Roman victories, and here's Zama over here in North Africa. That was the final victory for Rome. We take a look at Hannibal and his route and over the Alps into Italy, all the way north and south. And Hannibal's victory in the north and in Cannae right over here in 216. This was the famous Battle of Cannae here. Look at that journey. Wow. From Spain all the way down. If you take a look at the yellow, this is what Rome gains after this battle. In 202. Look at all this in Spain, Portugal, Corsica, Sardinia, Sicily. All of this is gained. But boy, did Hannibal do damage. Wow. And Tina, the Third Punic War.
The Third Punic War. So from 149 BCE to 146 BCE, 50 years after Hannibal's defeat, Carthage was ready for more and insulted a Roman delegation. Rome invades Carthage and burns it to the ground, steals its many wealthy and luxurious objects.
So this was a short one, 149 to 146. So there's an event that occurs in which Rome feels disrespected and insulted. And basically in very quick fashion, they invade Carthage and they basically burn it to the ground. Okay. I mean, they just absolutely destroyed it. This would be the last of Carthage. Okay. It is now a Roman territory, and there is no more Carthaginian Empire after 146. So this would be it. The third and final battle would be ended in 146 BC. And we're almost done. Tina, Roman victories, please, nice and loud.
During 400 years between expulsion of the Etruscans to end of Roman Republic, complete unification of entire Italian peninsula by 27 BCE, Rome defeats Carthage, giving Rome control of North Africa and Carthage's provinces in Spain. Macedonia and Greece are conquered and become Roman provinces. Pergamum, present-day eastern Turkey, became province of Asia Minor, the first Roman possession in Asia, And southern Gaul, which is South France, was conquered by Romans.
So by 27 BC, I mean, much of the Mediterranean world has been conquered. All right, so that's enough of me talking. I have a lot of different things you can do here. So the very first two. So the first one here is a PowerPoint of the Punic Wars. Now this is my PowerPoint, and it's very thorough and in depth. Okay, so this is I want everybody to read through this PowerPoint. Okay, as we see the two big boys on the block, Carthage and Rome. Okay, so I want you to read through this PowerPoint. It's all about the three wars. And you'll see here, I have a chart. You know I really like charts. Here's a chart of Punic Wars dates, the causes, actions, and results. Okay, there's just a one-page reading, just again another quick overview, or two-page, I should say, and that's it. So I just really want you right now to work on this chart. Okay, you could see this chart on the Punic Wars. Sorry, this is a PDF. You're gonna have to create this chart. Okay, but you just fill it out the best you can. You can do it by putting in what you learn in the reading. But probably better off using my PowerPoint. There's lots of information in my PowerPoint. Okay, and it goes through everything you need to know of each war. Okay. All right, is there any questions for me? Any questions for me? Okay, so the Punic Wars stretch from 264 to 146 BC. And this is really major battle. So please, so you're going to do a few things on the Punic Wars. Read PowerPoint and reading. And complete chart organizer. That's what you're going to do for me right now. Okay, so this is in class work. Okay. And again, all can be fine in the first. I'll just put this here. The first or the two items posted. For the first two items posted. That are these two. Okay.
There's a Dropbox for this homework, correct?
There is not a drop. There's no Dropbox yet. I didn't make it yet, right? Because we have just the Roman Republic. Okay, which I'm still missing. I only have 5 turned in, guys. I only have 5 turned in from the Roman Republic. This is going to be its own item. So please make sure you hand in the Roman Republic questions. I only have 5. Okay. This was the final attack on Carthage in 146.
Inside the city walls, the Romans became locked in a bitter fight for every street. To break the deadlock, Aemilianus ordered the city to be burnt. Ancient sources describe how the streets ran with blood. But eventually, after 6 days of brutal fighting, the Carthaginians surrendered.
It's your day, Tiberius. Hold your head high.
You did it. If only your father could see you now.
Rome is proud of her son. We have triumphed. From now on, nothing can challenge the power of Rome. But we're not finished. I want this damn city taken apart, reduce it to dust, and we'll plow the dust with salt, so not even weeds will grow in memory of Carthage.